The deafening alarm blared through the intergalactic embassy as First Lieutenant Frank Garrison sprinted down the polished corridor, his boots squeaking against the metallic floor. This wasn't how he'd planned to spend his first diplomatic mission to the Arxian homeworld. The peace treaty signing was in less than 3 hours, and now the Arxian High Command was questioning the fundamental ability of humans to serve as reliable allies in combat. Lieutenant Garrison, stop running before you break something, called out Ambassador Helena, her 4 violet eyes narrowing in concern. The tall, exoskeleton-covered Arxian diplomat clicked her mandible extensions in what Frank had learned was their expression of worry. Frank slowed to a brisk walk. Ambassador, I just got the message. Is it true? The Arxians are reconsidering the military alliance because they think we're too physically fragile. Helena's upper limbs twitched in affirmation. The Military Oversight Committee reviewed the human anatomical scans last night. They're concerned about your species' joint structure, particularly how easily they can be dislocated. Frank stifled a groan. After 5 years of careful negotiations to bring humans into the Galactic Federation as equals rather than protected species status, it had come down to this alien bureaucrats examining X-rays and declaring humans too breakable to fight alongside them. Where's the committee now? Frank asked, checking his watch. We need to address this immediately. War Chamber 7, Helena replied. They've assembled with General Krex and the other military officials. I must warn you, Lieutenant, they've been watching injury compilation videos from your planet's sporting events all morning. They're quite disturbed. Frank quickened his pace, with Helena's long strides easily keeping up. The war chamber doors hissed open to reveal 12 Arxian military officials, gathered around a holographic display, showing to Frank's horror highlights from last season's National Football League injuries. Ah, the human representative arrives, announced General Krex, his armored exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lights. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, the general's battle-scarred carapace bore the markings of dozens of successful campaigns. Perhaps you can explain why we should entrust galactic security to beings whose limbs detach during recreational activities. The hologram showed a quarterback's shoulder dislocating in slow motion. Several Arxian officers visibly recoiled, their breathing sacs inflating in distress. General, with all due respect, human joints are more complex than they appear, Frank began, adopting his most diplomatic tone. While our ligaments and tendons may not have the tensile strength of Arxian connective tissues, they offer exceptional range of motion and range of motion. Interrupted Commander Vistix, the head of the Military Oversight Committee. Lieutenant, your appendages literally come apart during minor impacts, she gestured to the hologram. How can we rely on allies whose primary weapons platforms your arms detach during standard operations? Frank took a deep breath. This wasn't just about the treaty anymore, it was about human dignity in the galactic community. For too long, Earth had been viewed as the home of an interesting but ultimately fragile species, worthy of protection but not true partnership. Our medical corps can rapidly treat most joint injuries, Frank explained. Many humans can even reset dislocations themselves in emergency situations. The chamber filled with a sound Frank recognized as the Arxian equivalent of skeptical laughter, a series of rapid clicks from their mandible extensions. Theoretical capabilities are meaningless, General Krex said, his voice resonating through the chamber. We require demonstration, not speculation. Ambassador Helena shifted uncomfortably. General, requesting physical demonstrations from diplomatic personnel is highly irregular. I'll do it, Frank interrupted, surprising even himself. I'll show you that human resilience is more than just talk. The room fell silent. Even the hologram paused on a particularly gruesome ankle injury. Lieutenant, this is unnecessary, Helena whispered urgently. We can arrange for medical experts to provide evidence. No, Frank said firmly. They need to see it firsthand. He turned to address the committee. General Krex, I propose a demonstration of human joint durability and recovery. I assume you have training facilities on this base. The general's secondary eyes narrowed, a sign of interest among Arxians. "We do. What exactly are you proposing, Lieutenant?" "A controlled dislocation and immediate self-reset," Frank said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. While he had dislocated his shoulder twice during his military service, self-resetting it wasn't exactly something he looked forward to repeating. The chamber erupted in clicking sounds as the Arxians discussed among themselves in their native tongue. Finally, General Krex raised a clawed appendage for silence. "Very well, Lieutenant Garrison. We will adjourn to Training Facility 3. If you can demonstrate this alleged resilience, the committee will reconsider their assessment." 20 minutes later, Frank found himself in the vast, high-ceilinged training facility surrounded by curious Arxian officers and medical personnel. Word had spread quickly, and now nearly 30 aliens watched with various expressions of scientific curiosity and skepticism. Dr. Zilnex, the chief Arxian medical officer, approached Frank with a scanning device. "I must insist on preliminary scans, Lieutenant, for your safety and our records." Frank nodded and stood still as the device hummed around his shoulder joint. The doctor's compound eyes widened slightly as he reviewed the results. "Fascinating," Dr. Zilnex murmured. "Your glenohumeral joint relies almost entirely on soft tissue for stability. No wonder your species experiences such frequent dislocations." "That's one way to look at it," Frank replied. "Another perspective is that our joints sacrifice some stability for exceptional range of motion and adaptability." The doctor made a non-committal clicking sound. "Perhaps. But no Arxian would accept such a design compromise." Frank smiled thinly. "Different evolutionary paths, different solutions." General Krex stepped forward. "Are we prepared to proceed with this demonstration?" Frank removed his uniform jacket and rolled up his sleeve. "Yes, sir. I'll need a firm surface to brace against and possibly an assistant." An Arxian junior officer named Tren volunteered, approaching Frank cautiously. Standing about 7 feet tall with a slender build compared to other Arxians, Tren seemed genuinely curious rather than dismissive. "I have studied human physiology as part of my xenobiology coursework," Tren explained. "I believe I understand what you're attempting." Frank positioned himself near a wall and explained the procedure to Tren. "I'll extend my arm at this angle. When I give the signal, you'll apply firm pressure here." He indicated a spot on his upper arm, "while I rotate forward. This should cause a controlled anterior dislocation." Dr. Zilnex stepped closer, alarm evident in his posture. "Lieutenant, our scans indicate this will cause significant trauma to your joint capsule and possibly tear your labrum." "It's a risk I'm willing to take," Frank replied, steeling himself. "Ready, Tren?" The young Arxian positioned his 3-fingered hand precisely where Frank had indicated. "Ready, Lieutenant," Frank nodded. "Now." The pain was immediate and blinding as his shoulder gave way with a sickening pop. Frank couldn't suppress a grunt of pain as his humeral head slipped forward out of the glenoid cavity. The room filled with alarmed clicking as the Arxians witnessed the deformation of his shoulder. "By the eternal hive," exclaimed one officer. His arm has partially detached. Frank's vision swam with pain, but he remained standing. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he carefully moved his arm into position for reduction. "Lieutenant, please allow our medical team to assist," Dr. Zilnex insisted, already reaching for equipment. "No," Frank gasped through gritted teeth. "This is part of the demonstration." The room fell silent as Frank took several deep breaths. Using his left hand to stabilize his right arm, he slowly rotated his dislocated shoulder outward, then carefully maneuvered it in an arc. With another nauseating pop that echoed through the chamber, the joint slid back into place. The Arxians erupted in a cacophony of clicks and hisses, their version of shocked exclamations. Dr. Zilnex rushed forward with his scanner while Frank leaned against the wall, breathing heavily as the pain began to subside to a dull throb. "Impossible," the doctor muttered, reviewing the scan results. "The joint has reseated itself with minimal additional damage. No Arxian could self-repair a major joint separation without surgical intervention." General Krex pushed through the crowd, his normally impassive face showing clear signs of what Frank recognized as astonishment. "You intentionally separated your limb joint and reconnected it, without tools or assistance," Frank nodded, wincing slightly. "It's not something we do for fun, General, but yes, many humans know this technique. Our military personnel are specifically trained in it." The general turned to the assembled committee members. "This changes our assessment." Commander Vistix stepped forward, her head tilted in the Arxian expression of reconsideration. While the initial fragility remains concerning, the ability to rapidly return to operational status is tactically significant. "It's more than that," Frank said, carefully testing his shoulder's range of motion. "Human resilience isn't about never getting injured, it's about adapting to injury and continuing to function." Dr. Zilnex was still scanning Frank's shoulder. "The joint shows inflammation consistent with trauma, but functionality has been largely restored. Remarkable." General Krex was silent for a long moment, his primary eyes fixed on Frank. Finally, he spoke. "Lieutenant Garrison has demonstrated something our tactical analyses failed to consider. Perhaps human physiology offers advantages we had not anticipated." Frank sensed an opening. "General, humans have survived on a high-gravity world with predators, natural disasters, and warfare. Our bodies reflect that history designed not to avoid damage but to sustain and recover from it." The general nodded slowly. "The Military Oversight Committee will reconvene immediately to reassess human capability ratings. Lieutenant, you will be provided with medical attention and then join us for the revised assessment." As the Arxians filed out of the training facility, Ambassador Helna approached Frank, her violet eyes blinking in what he now recognized as amazement. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen a human do," she said quietly, "but effective." Frank grimaced as doctor. Zilnex applied a cooling compress to his shoulder. "Sometimes you have to make a point dramatically for it to stick." "The treaty signing is in 2 hours, Helner reminded him. "Can you still attend?" Frank nodded. "Wouldn't miss it, though I might need to sign with my left hand." The military reassessment proceeded quickly. Frank, now with his arm in a sling provided by the Arxian medical team, found himself answering detailed questions about human recovery rates, battlefield first aid techniques, and the psychological impact of injuries. "So your military doctrine accounts for injury as an expected occurrence?" asked Commander Vistix, sounding almost impressed. "Absolutely," Frank confirmed. "We train extensively for casualty care in field conditions. Every soldier carries trauma equipment and knows basic procedures for treating themselves and others." General Krex made notes on his data pad. "And this self-resetting technique you demonstrated is it common knowledge?" "It's taught to special forces, pararescue teams, and others who operate in remote environments," Frank explained. "But many civilians with active lifestyles learn it too, especially athletes and wilderness guides." The committee members exchanged glances. Frank had come to recognize this as their way of silently communicating shared impressions. "We have reassessed your species' capability rating," General Krex announced finally. "While humans remain classified as having Type 4 structural vulnerability, we are adding a new designation, Class of Field Adaptability. This rating is shared only with the Nevrillians, whose regenerative capabilities are well documented." Frank couldn't hide his surprise. The Nevrillians were legendary for their ability to regrow limbs. Being compared to them was unexpected. "This new classification will be included in the military protocols of the treaty," the general continued. "Human forces will be deployed with the understanding that they possess unique recovery capabilities that offset their structural limitations." Commander Vistix added, "We will also begin joint training programs to better understand how our forces can complement each other in combat situations." Frank nodded, wincing slightly as the movement jostled his sore shoulder. "Thank you, General, Commander. This is a significant step forward for human-Arxian relations." The treaty signing ceremony began precisely on schedule in the Grand Chamber of the Arxian High Command. Frank stood at attention despite his injury, watching as Ambassador Helna and the Arxian Prime Counselor exchanged the ceremonial gestures that preceded the formal signing. "Today marks a historic alliance between our species," announced the Prime Counselor, her ornate exoskeleton gleaming with ceremonial markings. "The Arxian Dominion and Earth's United Nations will henceforth stand as equals in the defense of our shared galactic interests." As the dignitaries moved forward to sign the document, General Krex approached Frank. "Your demonstration has prompted a research initiative," the general said quietly. "Our medical corps is now studying human joint structure to determine if elements of your flexible design could be incorporated into our combat exoskeletons." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Really? I thought you found our joints disturbingly unstable." "Initial assessments were hasty," the general admitted. "Your ability to function despite structural compromise has tactical applications we had not considered. Flexibility and rapid recovery may be more valuable than absolute structural integrity in certain combat scenarios." The signing ceremony concluded with polite applause, humans clapping hands, while Arxians created rhythmic patterns with their mandible extensions. As the formal part of the event ended, Frank found himself surrounded by curious Arxian officers, all wanting to know more about human physiology. "Is it true humans can continue fighting with broken limbs?" asked one junior officer. "We've heard humans can lose significant blood volume and remain conscious," said another. Frank answered their questions as accurately as he could, neither exaggerating human capabilities nor downplaying them. By the time the reception ended, he had become something of a celebrity among the Arxian military personnel. Ambassador Helna found him as he was preparing to return to the human embassy complex. "Well, Lieutenant, it seems you've single-handedly changed the Arxian perception of humanity. The military alliance provisions have been strengthened considerably," Frank smiled. "Just doing my job, Ambassador, though I hope future diplomatic missions won't require joint dislocations to make progress. The medical team wants you to report to their facility tomorrow," Helna informed him. "They're insisting on monitoring your recovery process. For science, they say," Frank nodded. "I'll be there. If we're going to be military allies, they should understand how we heal." The next morning, Frank arrived at the Arxian medical facility to find an entire research team waiting for him. Dr. Zilnex greeted him with what Frank had learned to interpret as scientific enthusiasm. "Lieutenant Garrison, we've prepared a comprehensive scanning suite to document your healing progress. This is unprecedented access to human recovery mechanics." For the next 3 hours, Frank submitted to various non-invasive scans and tests while answering endless questions about human medical practices. The Arxian medical team was particularly fascinated by the concept of physical therapy. "You deliberately stress injured areas to promote healing, Doctor?" Zilnex asked, sounding both horrified and intrigued. "This contradicts all Arxian medical protocols. It's about rebuilding strength and flexibility," Frank explained. "If we immobilize an injury completely, the muscles atrophy and the joint stiffens. Controlled movement prevents that." The doctor made notes, his compound eyes blinking rapidly. "Fascinating. Your species treats trauma as an adaptive process rather than a state to be reversed." Over the next week, Frank became the center of an impromptu cultural exchange. As his shoulder healed, he demonstrated human rehabilitation exercises to the increasingly interested Arxian Medical Corps. In return, they shared advanced pain management techniques that helped him recover more comfortably. By the time Frank was cleared to return to full duty, news of his demonstration had spread throughout the Arxian military. The story had apparently grown with each retelling according to some versions. He had reattached an entirely severed limb while continuing to deliver his diplomatic presentation. General Krex requested a meeting with him on his last day of medical observation. "Lieutenant Garrison, your contribution to our understanding of human capabilities has been significant," the general said as they walked through the medical facility's garden area. It has prompted us to reconsider other species we previously classified as structurally insufficient for military alliance. Frank raised an eyebrow. I'm glad to hear that, General. Diversity of biological approaches can be a strength in coalition warfare. Indeed, the General agreed. The Military Oversight Committee has proposed a new training exchange program. We would like to send Arxian medical officers to Earth to study your rehabilitation techniques, while hosting human combat medics here to learn our trauma stabilization methods. That sounds like an excellent initiative, Frank said. I'll forward the proposal to United Nations Command immediately. The general hesitated, then added, there is one more matter. The High Command has authorized me to offer you a position as the first human liaison officer to the Arxian Defense Forces. Your unique demonstration of human capabilities has made you something of a legend among our ranks. Frank was momentarily speechless. This was far beyond what anyone had expected from this initial diplomatic mission. I'm honored, General. I'll need to consult with my superiors, but speaking personally, I would be very interested. Excellent, the General said, seeming pleased. We believe your presence would facilitate the integration of our forces as the alliance develops. 2 days later, Frank received official approval from United Nations Command to accept the liaison position. His first assignment was to help develop joint training protocols that accounted for the physiological differences between humans and Arxians. Working with Tren, who had been assigned as his Arxian counterpart, Frank created a comprehensive guide on human medical needs and capabilities for Arxian field commanders. Your species continues to surprise us, Tren commented as they finalized the document. Yesterday, I observed footage of your pararescue jumpers performing emergency procedures while descending from aircraft. The calculated risk assessment is unlike anything in Arxian military doctrine. Frank nodded. Humans have always had to balance capability against vulnerability. We can't match your structural strength or the regenerative abilities of the Nevrillians, so we compensate with adaptability and rapid response. The training integration program launched a month later, with 20 human combat medics arriving on the Arxian homeworld while 15 Arxian medical officers traveled to Earth. Frank supervised the exchange, his now fully healed shoulder serving as a practical example in many training sessions. During one demonstration, Frank overheard an Arxian officer commenting to a colleague, "Perhaps fragility is not the disadvantage we assumed it to be. These humans have developed remarkable adaptations precisely because they break so easily." 6 months into his liaison assignment, Frank received a surprising visitor. Ambassador Helena arrived at the military training complex with news from the Galactic Federation Council. "Lieutenant, or should I say Major now, Garrison," she greeted him, noting his recent promotion. "Your impromptu demonstration has had far-reaching consequences." Frank smiled. "Good ones, I hope." "Indeed. The Federation Council has revised its species capability classification system. The new system now includes recovery rate and field adaptability as core metrics, not merely structural resilience." Frank felt a surge of pride. "That's significant progress. How has it affected other species' standings?" "Several previously marginalized species have been reclassified as viable military partners," Helena explained. "The Tesserians, in particular, are grateful. Their crystalline physiology is prone to fractures, but they can repair themselves rapidly, a quality that was previously undervalued in Federation assessments." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "It's about time the Federation recognized that there's more than one way to be strong." In the following months, Frank supervised the first joint Arxian-human military exercises. The sight of the towering, exoskeleton-clad Arxians training alongside the smaller, more agile humans quickly became normal. Each species learned to compensate for the other's weaknesses while maximizing their unique strengths. General Krex, observing one particularly successful joint operation, commented to Frank, "Your shoulder dislocation may have been the most influential diplomatic incident in recent Federation history." Frank laughed. Not exactly what they taught us at the diplomatic academy. Sometimes the most effective demonstrations are unplanned, the general replied. The Council of High Commanders has authorized me to inform you that humans will be included in the upcoming Federation Defense Initiative. Your species will have equal standing with founding members. This was unprecedented. Earth had only been a Federation member for 3 years, and founding species like the Arxians had traditionally maintained privileged positions in defense planning. That's remarkable news, General, Frank said, genuinely surprised. May I ask what prompted this decision? The general's mandibles clicked in what Frank now recognized as amusement. Several factors, but the deciding one was simple. In our recent war games, the human Arxian joint teams outperformed pure Arxian units by 37%. Your species' approach to battlefield adaptation complemented our structural strength in ways our analysts had not predicted. A year after his shoulder dislocation demonstration, Frank stood in the grand chamber of the Galactic Federation Council, as Earth was formally designated a Tier 1 military ally, the highest classification in the Federation system. As the human representative, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come from that day in the Arxian training facility. After the ceremony, Dr. Zilnex approached him with a data pad. Major Garrison, I thought you might appreciate seeing this. It's the final report from our joint medical research initiative. Frank examined the document, his eyes widening as he understood its significance. The Arxians had developed a new type of flexible combat exoskeleton based partly on human joint design principles. Meanwhile, human military medicine had incorporated Arxian stabilization techniques that reduced dislocation recovery time by 60%. This is impressive work, Doctor, Frank said sincerely. Both our species have benefited. The doctor's mandibles clicked in agreement. Indeed. Though I must confess, I still find it unsettling to watch humans reset their own dislocations. I doubt I will ever become accustomed to that sight, Frank laughed. To be fair, most humans find it pretty unsettling too. As the Federation's first joint human Arxian military unit was officially commissioned the following week, Frank watched with pride as the soldiers from both species stood side by side. General Krex, now the Supreme Commander of Federation Combined Forces, delivered the commissioning address. Today marks the beginning of a new approach to galactic security, the general announced. One that values diversity of biological design as a strategic advantage rather than a liability. The unit before you represents the future of Federation defense doctrine, combining the structural resilience of Arxian physiology with the adaptability and recovery capabilities of humans. After the ceremony, Frank met with the human members of the new unit for an informal briefing. Captain Sarah Brooks, the human commanding officer, greeted him with a crisp salute. Major Garrison, the troops wanted to thank you personally, she said. Your shoulder incident has become something of a legend in the service. Frank smiled ruefully. Glad to know my pain served a purpose, Captain. How's the integration with the Arxian troops proceeding? Better than expected, sir, she replied. There was some initial awkwardness. They're constantly worried about accidentally injuring us. But after they saw Private Jenkins reset his dislocated finger during a training exercise without even calling a medic, their attitude changed completely. Frank nodded, remembering his own experience. They'll learn that humans are tougher than we look. Yes, sir. Though I've had to remind some of our people that we shouldn't try to match the Arxians in direct strength contests, Captain Brooks added with a smile. Corporal Miller learned that lesson the hard way when he challenged an Arxian to arm wrestling. Let me guess, dislocated elbow, Frank asked. Wrist, actually, she replied. But he popped it back in place and immediately asked for a rematch. The Arxians couldn't believe it. Now they're all studying human joint mechanics in their off hours. 2 years to the day after Frank's demonstration, he attended a special ceremony at the Federation Military Academy. As a key architect of the new joint training protocols, he had been invited to observe the graduation of the first class of officers trained under the integrated system. The class included representatives from 17 species, including several that had previously been considered too structurally vulnerable for frontline service. Watching them receive their commissions, Frank felt a deep sense of satisfaction. General Krex joined him as the ceremony concluded. A significant day, Major Garrison. Each of these officers has been trained to value the unique capabilities of all Federation species. Frank nodded. It's remarkable how much has changed in 2 years. Indeed, the general agreed. And to think it began with your rather alarming shoulder demonstration. The general paused, then added, the Federation Council is establishing a new diplomatic principle based on this experience. They're calling it the Garrison Doctrine, the recognition that biological diversity represents tactical advantage rather than weakness. Frank felt a surge of pride mixed with embarrassment. That's quite an honor, General, though I hope future diplomats find less painful ways to make their points. The general's mandibles clicked in amusement. As do we all, Major, as do we all. As they watched the newly commissioned officers dispersing to their assignments, Frank reflected on how a moment of pain had transformed into lasting change. What the Arxians had initially seen as a fatal weakness, the fragility of human joints, had ultimately revealed a different kind of strength. The ability to adapt, recover, and continue functioning despite injury. It wasn't the kind of diplomatic breakthrough that anyone could have planned or predicted. But in the complex dance of interspecies relations, sometimes the most powerful demonstrations came from showing not how strong you were, but how you handled weakness. The Arxians had learned that resilience took many forms, and humans had gained equal standing in the galactic community not by hiding their vulnerabilities, but by showing how they overcame them. Frank's shoulder occasionally still ached when the weather changed a small price to pay for the alliance that had grown from his impromptu demonstration. As he watched the new officers, human, Arxian, and a dozen other species heading out to serve together, he knew the Federation was stronger for embracing their differences rather than fearing them. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Federation, the official species capability classification for humans had been updated with a notation that still made Frank smile whenever he saw it. Warning: structural vulnerabilities offset by exceptional recovery capabilities. Do not underestimate based on initial fragility assessments. Human joints too fragile by fragile design, it seems.